G'day guys and welcome, my name's Michael and I am the Dead Aussie Gamer, here to share with you my tips, tricks, ideas and strategies for playing and running tabletop role-playing games. Today's video actually comes to the question that I was asked a long time ago. Sadly, I can't remember who asked it, but if you're watching, please, I hope you're watching, here is the answer. The question was, how do I use a lot of the old role-playing game tropes and give it a fresh take? Now, at the time I got the question, I remember writing a response that I wasn't entirely happy with. It was along the lines of adding very superficial changes, making things aesthetically different, and that's it. But in that time since then, I've kind of figured out the real way that you want to use those tropes and those things that are just so familiar, so iconic, and so well known, is you want to use subversion. Flipping the idea of the outcome right up on its head to give that element of surprise, variety, and of course, just change to those very old and tired tropes. In an example, I was playing a horror game recently, and in that story, the quest being given to the players was they had to go to a graveyard in order to exhume a corpse. Doing so, they need to then perform a ritual on the body so that it doesn't raise an undead. Now, as in most games very similar to this, my players then started to run rampant with ideas. Okay, guys, come on. We're going to go over here. Someone's not going to let us in to see the corpse. And then once we get there, it's already going to be turned and we're going to have to kill it. The story had already written itself before I'd even begun. Now, at the time that I was writing this adventure, I realized that was just such an easy thing to read, The expectations were so clear from my players as to what was going to happen. So I dug a little deeper. I started looking around, and I actually found a very interesting type of scenario. There were these things called, I want to say they're called grave risen. And the grave risen are basically these undead who have been buried alive and have animated the soil with necrotic energy and risen to be undead. They then attack the living and then put them into a coma, at which point people perceive them as being dead, they get buried, and then about a week later they return from the dead and, scratch their way back to the surface or die. Now, I thought this was a great monster, a great idea, and to subvert expectations, rather than having the corpse that they were after be dead and turn into a zombie and attack them, the corpse, even though it'd been buried for a week, was still alive. The week that had passed was the enough time for that coma that these creatures use to wear off, so the person was actually alive and well, and my group definitely had a very interesting response to it when they dug up this thing, and I had this character lurch, gasping for air, and they took a swing. Now, it was actually due to the quick thinking of the group's paladin that stopped them from cleaving the head clean off this poor person, but that subversion of expectation was what became really surprising. Now, of course, I didn't just spring this upon them just to punish them. I gave them some clues, which the paladin had the chance to put together. The clues being, of course, that recently other people had been found, dead in the area, and others had sort of thought they'd heard scratching noises coming from below ground when those earlier people had died. Now, piecing these together and doing some research, they found the right answers and the right clues, but nonetheless, the story that they had thought was going to happen no longer did. And that's subverting expectations. That is changing that ideal and flipping it on its head. Okay, so how do we go about doing it? Now, we can do it in a number of ways, but more importantly, we need to define whether or not we're doing it as a game master or as a player. Now, subverting expectations as a game master is a very tricky thing to do on the fly, and I'm going to tell you this. There are lots of ways that we can hear the ideas coming from the table. Players blurting something out. Oh, it's this monster, that's what we're fighting. Or, okay guys, listen, this is a CR blah blah blah, we're going to only need this much abilities, but, And as a knee-jerk reaction, we can sometimes change things up, make the monster something different. We can, add more hit points. We can change those little elements of it. And while that is subverting expectations to a degree, it's not, I suppose, the most efficient use of subverting expectation. What you want to do is you want to have a nice plan that manipulates those expectations. Label out what you think your players are going to feel, where they're going to go. Understand how not only they play as individuals, but how their characters would react to certain scenarios. Do you frighten them and guide them into a direction by presenting them with something that is going to push them away? Or are you going to attract them through something shiny and, something that they desire, and then move them this way and that way? At the table, when they outline their expectations, it is the best opportunity for you to be able to change and shift them. Don't be afraid to, but at the same time, if you do it all the time, then it becomes an expectation. I hope that makes sense. If you subvert the expectation all the time, the subversion becomes the expectation, and you need to flip it back. Good. I'm glad we went over that. All right. A great example of a good time to subvert expectations is when you can visually see your players getting bored or getting tired of a particular scenario. I remember that I was talking to someone who was looking for advice on why their players were having so much trouble getting behind a lot of NPCs. And we discovered that it was because he, as a GM, loved the story of the betrayal. And it was a great story, you go and you trust these people who are seemingly harmless, and lo and behold, they turn around and they backstab you. But I think we counted it, and we found out in the 7 games he had played, the group had gone through 11 betrayals. And it was just kind of like really, 7 games, 11 betrayals. That's a lot of betrayals. And, at that point, they were expecting people to betray them. So I advise this person, what you need to do is you need to let this person or people seem so suspicious, so just expectingly treacherous, I guess, that your players have no choice but to do something drastic. Once they do something drastic, then you need to flip that on them and say, actually, they were just people. They were just nice. I did that once with a group of farmers who had literally stopped the group on the way to the next destination. All they wanted was a ride. And you should have seen the group. It was amazing. They just sat there. They put on watch rotations. They confiscated their guns. Any kind of conversation they had, they were so like, no, we're not telling them anything. No, we can't tell them where we're going. Of course we can't tell them anything. And then at the end, they simply got to the farm. They waved goodbye, and they left. And my players stopped as they were riding away from the farm. And they're like, is that it? It's like, yeah. It's like, but they just got here. Yeah. 4 hours. We were talking to them, and there was all these encounters and roll checks, and so I'm like, yeah. But they were just farmers. Yeah. And it was hilarious because they had a great time, even though it wasn't really a threat. Their own nightmarish, I guess, imaginations took that straight into the wind. So, that was a fantastic moment to use that particular subversion. All right. Players subverting expectations. Now, this is an interesting one. I love when players subvert expectations, and those of you who have watched my channel for a while now know that I am not a min-maxer, I am a max-minner. I like to find characters who don't seem to work and try to make them work. I will play things that are mechanically garbage because I want to subvert expectations. A dwarf wizard or a gnomish barbarian. What are these characters like? How do you make them functional? What do they do in the team, and how do they contribute? These characters are just so interesting to me. And one of the great things that I love is seeing these guys across my table, not only mechanically changing and subverting what people expect, but also exploring that kind of persona with your own background, Like the idea that all barbarians have to come from this, tribal family and have to have this, deep-seated rage. I was talking to someone today about the idea of a barbarian who actually didn't like his anger management issues and was actively trying to solve them, avoiding using rage in combat to instead just try and use diplomacy and use his words, but of course, every now and then, succumbing to those barbaric tendencies. Another conversation I had was a particular spellcaster who are notoriously weak, being constitution weakness, like, so basically having their constitution so damn low that they were bedridden as a character. And it's like, well, okay, there's this bedridden character who just spends all this time kind of sick and dying, and the spells and magic that he uses don't help him, you know, they're just kind of there. It was a very interesting character. So be sure that if you're exploring that, subverting expectations is always fun because it makes a unique character, but don't throw yourself under the bus and make yourself non-functional. You need to still remain functional, but challenge yourself, you know. It is so easy to play a half-orc barbarian who swings around a greatsword. But when was the last time you saw a half-orc barbarian who swung around a sap or a mace or a butter knife, you know? Play around with these things. Change it up a bit. Because, and I'll tell you this, as someone who plays as low-powered as possible, there are always ways to figure out mechanics to work. Whether you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, Pathfinder, Through the Breach, Shadowrun, doesn't matter. There's always a minimum level, and there's always some way for you to be able to balance that out. So yeah, players. Now, why do it? Why am I making this sound so interesting? What is the point? See, after you play for a while, if you've got a weekly game, if you've got a monthly game, whatever have you, expectations become tired. They become boring, and that is the biggest threat to any good GM. If your players start to read you like a book and know exactly what you're going to do each and every time, it's going to become harder and harder for you to maintain that level of engagement and that level of intensity, even to the point where you yourself may start to feel like everything is becoming old hat. I've definitely had a few games recently which have felt kind of like I'm just going through the motions. I'm running through my adventure, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, and you know, every now and then, whenever I get those opportunities to follow those expectations, but then suddenly twist and change it, there is an exhilaration that comes in, not only for me, but for my players as well. So I encourage you, if you've not done this before, if you've considered dabbling in it, write out an encounter. Find a very typical D&D story, D&D thing, and as a challenge to yourself, write out what your expectations of your table would be, and then flip it around. Add a twist, add a turn, add a flip, add some sort of outcome that makes the conclusion of this particular quest something completely different, something that your players are just simply not going to expect to happen. Thank you so much, guys, for listening. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Go check us out on all of our social media. We now have our active Facebook page at facebook.com/deadaussiegamer, and of course, we have our live shows on twitch.tv/deadaussiegamer. And if you want to support us and keep our channel running, then head on over to our Patreon page, whereas for literally as little as a ham and cheese toasty at the end of every month, you can help us keep the lights on. Thanks again. Until next time, guys, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, game hard, or die trying. Bye!